Like, what do I say about myself? How far back do I go? It was 1992.
Welcome to Politics on the Patio. I'm Andrew Swenson, and I have with me this week Kiley Shuler. So Kiley, as we're cracking open our drinks, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, my name is Kiley Shuler. I work in advertising here in Lincoln. I'm an account manager, and let's see, I've lived in Lincoln for only a couple of years now. I went to school in Kearney. I grew up in a smaller town, 4,400. So I feel like a lot of people in Nebraska would be like, that's actually like a pretty big sized town. So smaller than Lincoln. I come from like a fairly small town, like Nebraskan conservative background. I'm a mom. I have a 10-and-a-half-month-old baby and a husband and a dog.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we have some commonalities. I grew up in a small town, but in Iowa. We can fight about that later. I'm also a dad. I also work in marketing. So for context, for the rest of our conversation, I'm wondering how you identify. Do you identify with the political party, or do you see yourself somewhere on the liberal conservative spectrum, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I've never really felt like I've strongly identified with a certain political party. I think both political parties have just become so polarized that, and I think most Americans don't really identify as like a Democrat or a Republican, and that they do fall somewhere, as like between liberal and conservative or somewhere in the middle. I think that a lot of my political beliefs have always been tied to like my moral beliefs, which has been rooted in my religious beliefs, and so I've always really identified more as a Christian, and I've tried to vote in that direction. And I think a lot of my Christian beliefs have made me feel very strongly about key policy issues that a lot of times are tied to the Republican Party, and so I'd say I generally vote Republican. But again, I don't think I consider myself necessarily Republican. I've always been afraid to like label myself as that. I think a lot of times when people hear like, oh, I'm a Republican, they think, okay, you're a homophobic, anti-immigration, Bible thumping, pro-birth, whatever. And I think on the flip, you have like Democrats who are like, oh, like you are a snowflake crybaby who gets like emotional about everything. And so I think that there are just like very strong typecasts, and I've kind of avoided labeling myself as either party. But
well, I am a snowflake crybaby, for full disclosure.
Well,
I
would have guessed.
I tend to be a little more liberal, and I tend to vote with the Democrats, but I appreciate your explanation of not necessarily falling into one place or another.
Cool.
Yeah. So for our current events section this week, you chose to talk about something that's really interesting, the Miss America contest. Don't call it a pageant, it's a contest. The Miss America contest has announced that they're going to get rid of the swimsuit competition and the evening wear competition as well. So I'm interested, why did you want to talk about that? What are your thoughts? What's going through your brain?
No, you told me to select a current event, and I didn't know what to select, and I saw that that was a thing, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, and I read just a deep thread on Twitter of people's reactions to it, and I thought that was like kind of hilarious, and I kind of got lost in that. So to be honest with you, I have almost no opinion on this. I think there are like various sides to talk about, where like I think there are pros and cons, and yeah.
So what do you see as, maybe we'll start with the con side, like what do you see as bad about this decision, or what could you possibly see as an argument that seems like it might be interesting to you?
Okay, so I'm going to actually start with the pros, even though you told me not to.
Okay, it's fine. It's fine. You start where you want.
So the pros are, like, I think obvious. Like, we don't judge women by, like, the way that their stomach looks or, like, the length of their legs or whatever. I think that, like, seeing, like, photos of, like, a group of pageant women, like, in bikinis, like, can be like, it's like, I feel like a little uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, and like they look uncomfortable. It's just like a bunch of grown women standing in front of like thousands of people on television in their bikinis. And so the concept has always been like kind of weird to me, but that's also just like what a Miss America has always been. And so like the con side of it is I'm like, I think if it's not a pageant and you don't have bikinis and you don't have evening wear, then like what is it? And like why don't they just like submit their SATs online and then they can get the scholarship that way?
So I think you brought up a really interesting thing, which is actually part of what I believe about this, and I realize this might be a little incendiary. And I
It's
feel
a great word, by the way.
I feel a little weird also talking about it as a guy, but I'm trying to approach this from just a more of a. So we're both work in marketing and advertising, and I think Miss America has a brand issue. So if we said we're getting rid of evening wear and swimsuits because we don't want to have this competition be judged on people's appearance. And I gave this disclaimer, don't call it a pageant, and you called it a pageant even in your description, but that is the way people think about it. I don't think just telling people this is a competition, it's not a pageant, I don't think changing a couple of things is enough. If we say this devalues women, so we're not going to do it anymore, but we're still going to have this, I think there's so much baggage there that the answer is probably just to get rid of it, to rebrand it and make it be something that is not necessarily about submitting your SAT scores online, but honestly, what I care about more is there are a ton of really interesting, strong, smart women who are creating change in their communities, and it's really easy for people to take a video, upload it online, and you could have a competition like that where we're showcasing the stuff people are doing. I don't really care so much about a competition where I get to know a person's personality. So I think the issue is the competition itself. And I think we're actually having a conversation about trying to fix something that I don't know if it can be fixed. And so I'd rather just like, let's get rid of it.
I mean, brass tacks is like no matter what the competition entails, like it's still like women against women on a stage in front of people. So I'm even like getting rid of the bikini part. I don't know. I mean, and also I do want to say one of my biggest, like one thing that really bothers me is when men feel like they have to like disclaim what they're saying because they're a man. I think that men should be able to have an opinion about like all women's issues. I'm not an immigrant, but I think that I should still get an opinion on like immigration issues.
That's my liberal snowflakeness coming through, right? But I couch it as really interesting. I couch it that way because I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to this conversation with a limited set of experience. So I'm judging this based on my experience of being a man and my experience of there being thousands of years of men being in control. So it was really interesting to me. NPR played a little bit of old like 1940s promotion from this.
From the pageant?
From the pageant.
From the competition.
Well, it was a pageant. It was definitely a pageant then. And it was basically talking about, hey guys, check it out. Check out all these women. And it felt like they were just sort of on parade and we're trying to find the loveliest one of them all. And that was really troubling to me. And so I feel like I can't divorce what I'm saying from the understanding of this pageant was built as a thing for men to ogle at women. And I have trouble being able to talk about it without couching it in that way.
That's totally fair. I think that like the women who do compete for Miss America right now, I don't think that they identify as pageant women. I think that they see it as like an opportunity to showcase like their public speaking skills, or to get better at public speaking, or to like make new friends, or to network, or to just like have a different experience, or I mean to like show their talents or talk about, you know, political issues or what be it. And so yeah, I mean I think it's I don't know what they'll be called now, because they won't be called pageant women. And I mean does that trickle down into like all pageants now? Like are we eliminating the word pageant entirely?
What will happen to toddlers and tiaras? What will we do?
I think that's where this goes, you know.
I think the upshot about this though is that we don't really understand the purpose of the event. Both of us are looking, it's like, what is the purpose of Miss America now? And that's something that they're going to have to figure out.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Kylie, I'm going to sort of rapid fire ask you about a bunch of topics, and I want you to tell me if that topic or person or whatever is good for the world or bad for the world. You're free to pass, but
Because you have not prepped me
I have not,
on this.
no.
I have no idea what you're going to read.
So the first one is romaine lettuce.
Good for the world. As opposed to iceberg lettuce?
Okay.
Is that the alternative?
It just killed people. I mean, I'm just
Romaine
saying.
lettuce just killed people?
There were so many bugs on it.
Oh, I was too busy reading about the pageants to make...
Online dating.
Good for the world.
Yeah?
Yeah. Do you want me to explain any
You
of
can
these?
if
We're
you
just
want to.
rapid
Otherwise,
firing.
if you're just done, you're just
No,
done.
I know a lot of people who have like met their spouses online. I would say don't date someone online, meet someone online, and then date them
Oh, okay. So there's
IRL
a- yeah, okay.
in real life.
You mentioned this earlier, Twitter.
Oh, bad for the world.
You just used it to do your research.
It's bad.
Okay.
I do a lot of things that are bad for the world. Twitter. I read YouTube comments.
Oh, that's just painful.
Yeah.
All right. The upcoming nuclear summit between the U.S. and North Korea.
Good for the world.
Fair enough. Kanye West.
Bad for the world.
Really?
Kanye.
The Kardashians.
Bad for the world.
All right, you're just down on popular. How about Elon Musk?
Pass. I don't know who that is.
Oh, he's the Tesla guy.
Mm-hmm.
No. Okay. The Robert Mueller investigation into possible collusion with Russia.
Good for the world.
She identifies as a Republican sometimes, everybody. Let's just
Wow.
put a note on that. Presidential pardons.
Good for the world unless the president is pardoning himself. Then
Fair enough. We share an opinion about that. Okay, last one. Roseanne Barr.
Bad for the world.
All right.
I mean, I never watched her show to begin with, so I was never like a fan. I've only just like seen her tweets over the past 10 years or however long she's had Twitter.
See, I have probably seen every episode of the original Roseanne, and
Did
I
you
very
like
much
it?
liked it.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that this person is not my childhood memory, so
That's upsetting.
it is.
Yeah.
So for our policy issue today, I think something that's very close to your heart is the issue of pro-life, pro-choice. Should we legislate, pass laws that outlaw abortion or not? And I think you have a very clear perspective on that. So why don't we start just by sharing what you think of this particular policy and what you think the world should move toward?
Yeah. It's a very touchy subject, and I think it's something that people have like very emotional connections to. And I mean, statistically, 1 in 3 women have had an abortion, and so it's something that I think we should be very careful to talk about. I think there's a lot of pain involved with it, whether there's like pain in, having to like recall that time that you had an abortion, and like, having like harboring pain because of that decision you made, or just the pain that led into that decision that you had to make, or you felt like you had to make. So it's something that I've always been like very careful to approach and careful to talk about. But I do have like fairly staunch views on it. And I think it's an issue that I think you really have to like kind of get into the heart of like the person that you're talking to like really understand and appreciate like why they've formed this view that they have. I think there are a lot of people who are like fairly indifferent about it, but then you do have people who are like on the polar sides, and I guess I probably am on like the more polar side, where I don't really feel like there's ever an instance where abortion is justified just because I see like an embryo, even at like its youngest stage at 6-8 weeks old, when the heartbeat begins. I see that as a human life, and think that no matter our level of development or how old we are, that there's like a dignity and value in human life, and it's worth protecting at any stage.
So what do you think, so if you believe that here's an embryo, I believe you believe that's a person, right?
Yeah.
So then what do you think needs to change, or how does that affect the way that you interact with politics or the way that you vote, or how does that alter the way you see where we should go? I
think using the word person, it makes it really, really like the word person is really difficult to define. So I have a 10.5-month-old baby, and like I still see her as a baby. Like she's a human being, and she has you know, the rights of a person, but like it's weird to look at a baby and be like, you're a person. So it's like, at what age does a human become a person? But no matter how old you are, like, again, like I know like 30-year-olds who I'm like, you're more of a baby than you are like a functioning like person or adult. So I believe that, yeah, even at 6-8 weeks, that's a human being. As far as like politically, you know, where that puts me, I think, so I mentioned earlier that a lot of my political beliefs come from like my religious beliefs. I'm Catholic, and so like the Catholic Church has, you know, like very clear, it's very clearly communicated the importance of voting for pro-life politicians and really pushing like pro-life legislation, and there's not really a whole lot of wiggle room there. And so just to be like in good conscience as a Catholic when I vote, I wouldn't call myself a single issue voter, but it's probably like the first issue that I look at to make sure that whatever politician or whoever I'm voting for is able to align with that belief.
So is it for you, it's really just the first thing you check is the policy stance on, should we, I want to put a really clear point on this, should we pass legislation that makes abortion illegal? That's the first thing you look at to say, yes, this person supports legislation to make abortion illegal. And if that person says, no, I don't think we should, then you feel like you can't vote for that person.
And that's like, I mean, I think there are very few politicians who actually say like, I'm pushing this legislation to make abortion illegal in every single case, you know, no matter the circumstance. And I think abortion is also, there's a lot of baggage with that word, but it's also just the name of a medical procedure. And so like, and I think there are a lot of women, I'm kind of like straying from what you asked here. There are a lot of women who receive an abortion even though they're pro-life or staunchly pro-life, but the name of the procedure was an abortion, but they had to get it because they had, you know, cancer in their uterus, and the only way to remove the cancer was to remove all the contents of their uterus, and that's an abortion. But really they were removing the cancer, and having to remove the baby was just one of the other things that, like, by, you know, removing all the contents of the uterus, it was an abortion. And the church has, I would say, I don't want to say like leniency, but I don't know if most people would consider that like an abortion. I guess my problem is like elective abortion. I think that's probably a better descriptor for it. And so, yes, that when it comes to just like having an abortion because like you just don't want a child, like to me that should be illegal in all cases, and I'll vote for a politician who agrees with that.
So what I appreciate about what you did just now is you pushed me a little bit on my sort of simple framing of the issue, in that you said, well, wait, it's not just about being a person, here's what I really mean, and we'll wait, it's not about just making abortion this word, it's about the elective part of it. I think it's really easy for us to pull these things into polls and just say, this is what you think, this is what I think, and not really to get to the nuance or to see people that have these nuanced views. I think though, for me, I'm a pretty big pragmatist when it comes to these issues, and so what I tend to look at is the result of either legislation or community action or whatever. I think no one on the left or right says, you know what the world needs more of are abortions. Yeah. So if you ask me, good for the world, bad for the world, abortions, I'd say bad for the world, but not necessarily that doesn't mean that I am, you know, not pro-choice. I definitely am, but I think through things like education or additional healthcare options, we could probably reduce the amount of people who have to go through that unfortunate experience, because it's not a fun thing, no matter if you're validating that choice or if you're struggling with trying to, you know, see it as a life or as not. I think part of the issue comes back to the way you framed it too. Where you see personhood starting is part of the problem. So for the people who are pro-life, you're saying human being, it's when it's fertilized egg, right? And for the people who are pro-choice, they're saying this is not a person yet. It is a bunch of cells. It's fertilized. It has the potential to be, but it is not yet a person. So there's a split at the very first principle of the argument, which makes it very difficult, I think, to have these conversations sometimes. It also makes it really easy to jump right to being where I'm at in my camp, because it's such a personal issue, and it's hard to see some of the more complexities of where a person might come down. What I don't quite understand, though, is the calculation with voting, because I see a politician, in particular, like in the last election, I would make the argument that Hillary Clinton was actually more pro-life, if we want to talk about that, than Donald Trump. Because what we saw with the Republican administration, and in particular with related to healthcare, is that they wanted to strip away healthcare from, depending on which CBO score you looked at, about 24 million people. Which, if you pair that with legislation that outlaws abortion, would mean lots of women having babies into a system where they can't afford to support them. Basic health care, we've seen the Republican Congress wanting to roll back things like SNAP benefits, can't feed their kids. And so my argument would be probably to respect life more is to expand things like health care, still allow there to be choice on that particular issue, but give more people Medicaid, give more people access to benefits like SNAP. I know those things are not mutually exclusive, but within the particular party system, you have to kind of take the whole thing together. And so my pragmatic calculation is, if we want to improve people's lives and the people's lives who are now living, I think we should support them through those social net programs, but I can't get that if I vote for a Republican. What would you say to that?
That's interesting. And so earlier when I said, like, I generally like vote as a Christian, but like there's not really like a Christian candidate, maybe since like Reagan, who was probably like the only president that's existed that like maybe aligned on both of those. But as far as being like pro-life in the sense that I don't like abortion and I don't think that it should be an option, or I would rather see people like parent than choose abortion, and also like, so I would say I identify as like socially conservative and fiscally liberal, and that's like just not anything that like is ever going to exist politically, because to me that's taking like, in my opinion, like the best side of like the Republican Party and the best side of the Democratic Party and combining them. And so I agree with you that I think that Hillary Clinton was more like, I would say maybe more like pro-abundant life. So like living a life that's already been born and being able to receive some of those benefits. Like I think SNAP is a great program, and I'm all for, like, I don't mind paying my taxes. Like I've never cared about paying my taxes because I mean, I have 3 brothers that are in the military, and my dad is a sheriff's deputy. I once worked at the university. Like most of my family's livelihood has also been paid by taxes. But I see government programs that are very beneficial, and I'm happy to contribute my money to those programs, like healthcare. And I think that's one of the biggest disappointments about the Republican Party. It's something that has just like never made sense to me. Like why you want babies to be born, but then also want to like strip women from their health care. I think it's really hard to sell this idea that like you love women when you don't want to take care of them. And so that's one big beef that I've always had with the Republican Party, and a huge reason why I don't identify with that party. So I do agree with you on that. I don't know. I mean, when you say pro-life, so there's a lot of things that are involved in that. So it's not just, I don't like abortion, but it should be like I'm against the death penalty. Like I think that everyone should have this opportunity to live life. Like we shouldn't just like kill people, like even though they were bad people. I don't believe in euthanasia, like assisted suicide. And so those are all things that are involved in like in the pro-life group. So from like an abortion perspective, just knowing like when you think pro-life, you think of abortion. I don't know if I would ever like actually say like Hillary Clinton is more pro-life, because it makes it sound like she wasn't receiving like millions of dollars from Planned Parenthood, which is the biggest abortion provider in the country. But
so I think though what you presented for me today was a little bit more nuance on how somebody who is pro-life and the reason, I still don't quite understand your reasoning for how you vote, because I see it as a whole package, but I can appreciate where you're coming from and in your position. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Kiley, thank you so much for being a guest today. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, what are 3 things that people could either read, watch, listen to get a better understanding of maybe who you are or the issues that you believe in?
Okay, let's see. I know of 2 at the top of my head, and I'm hoping that the 3rd one is just going to come to me. So the first one is you have to watch all 9 seasons of The Office at least a dozen times, just to watch them at least like half as many times as I have. And to kind of get myself to think of the next topic, I'm going to quote Michael Scott, and that sometimes I just start talking and I have no idea where I'm going, and I just hope that I find it along the way. Another thing that I think would be helpful to listen to is, so Catholic Answers has a radio show, and they have callers call in, and so they have a few programs a day, but every day between 5 and 6 p.m. Catholic Answers is a call-in, and it'll be like, why are you pro-choice will be the topic of the day, and they have Catholic apologists that'll talk with people over the phone about these issues, or they'll say like, why aren't you Catholic? And so it's really cool because you get to hear a lot of like this type of discourse of, you know, people saying like, this is what I believe, and it's very interesting to listen to. And so I think that's a good way to understand a little bit more even like politically where some of my beliefs can like come from, like my Catholic beliefs. And
we should say that an apologist is not someone who is saying I'm sorry, but they're defending. They're a defender.
Yeah, thank you. Defender of the faith. And then a third thing, oh lordy, I would say, I mean, prompt me. Give me a.
Could be music, could be TV, could be a book, could be a website.
I would say I spend a lot of time on Ad Age.
Yeah.
I enjoy that site. I mean, it's somewhat relevant to what I do in advertising. So staying up to current events, and so I think, yeah, I would say like, so The Office, like socially, you learn a little bit more about me. Catholic Answers, religiously, like you can understand where I'm coming from. And Ad Age, like you can get a better idea of like what I do 40 hours a week. Well, usually more than that, but.
So it's fair to say that you're not, I know that feeling. It's fair to say that you're not just a person who sits in your basement and plots the demise of Planned Parenthood.
I read more than the Daily Wire, although I do read Daily Wire sometimes.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being our guest today.
Fun.
And we'll talk soon.
Yeah.
How do we end it? That's staying in together.
I think maybe you cheers.
Oh yeah, we have to cheers now. Let's do it.
There we go.
Cheers!
Well, folks, it's time to kick it old school.
You just said you vote Democrat.
Did I really say Democrat?
I think we gotta start over. So this is good for the world, bad for the world. Are you on Facebook? Yeah. Perfect. I cry a little sometimes.
I'm not gonna stumble over how do you say it? Conservative.
That's going in the outtake. Conservatism.
Conservatism.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna avoid it. Okay.